Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Look, if you're the kind of person who loves pulling back the curtain to see the deeper gears actually turning our world, you are in the right place. We are unpacking something totally monumental. Today is April 30, 2026, and we are witnessing literally right now the most significant structural shift in global energy since the 1970s. We're going to dig into the data, break down the geopolitical chessboard, and see exactly how global supply chains are being radically rewritten as we speak.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's a question that sounds almost absurd when you first hear it, right? How on earth does a boardroom disagreement in the Middle East crash your local grocery budget? But guys, this is the ultimate butterfly effect in action. We are going to trace a perfectly straight line from a diplomatic rupture in the Persian Gulf, straight through a highly volatile military blockade, all the way down to the price of the food sitting on your table and the fuel pumping into your car.
So, let's start with Section 1, the spark in the Gulf.
To really grasp the global fallout here, we've got to start with the initial spark. Effective tomorrow, May 1, 2026, the United Arab Emirates is formally ending its nearly 60-year membership in OPEC and the broader OPEC Plus alliance. Now, make no mistake, this isn't just some minor policy tweak. This is a massive, earth-shaking structural disruption to the energy order we have all known for decades. To understand why this is happening, you kind of have to think of OPEC historically like, well, the most frustrating group project you've ever been a part of. Saudi Arabia is essentially the strict group leader. Their philosophy relies on absolute cartel discipline, holding back supply to keep global prices artificially high and stable, which pays for their domestic spending. But the UA, they've felt like the brilliant overachiever, forced to constantly hold back their potential. They have some of the lowest cost reserves on the planet. They can rake in profits even when prices are rock bottom. So by sticking to these strict quotas, the UAE essentially became the cartel's shock absorber, leaving their massive infrastructure investments just sitting idle, while everyone else reaped the benefits.
Now, what's really interesting here is the staggering gap in underutilized capacity. The UAE boasts the actual physical capacity to pump 4.85 million barrels a day, but their output under the cartel's quota, a mere 3.10 million, that is a massive chunk of wasted potential. The leadership in Abu Dhabi finally decided they could no longer tie their own national economic vision and their really aggressive goal of hitting 5 million barrels per day by 2027 to Riyadh's obsession with collective discipline. So they walked away.
And as this quote perfectly captures, this messy divorce entirely strips away that traditional, warm, brotherly rhetoric we're so used to hearing in Gulf diplomacy. The gloves are completely off. This clash of massive economic ambitions between Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and Abu Dhabi's long-term strategy has just introduced a wildly volatile new variable into the world market at the exact moment the world can least afford it.
Which brings us to Section 2. The butterfly effect begins.
Because, of course, this boardroom divorce didn't just happen in a vacuum. Right at the same time, a catastrophic military conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran has turned this diplomatic split into a total global supply chain nightmare. What we are seeing play out right now is essentially a dual blockade in the region. Following the total collapse of the Islamabad talks, U.S. forces under CENTCOM stepped in and intercepted 33 vessels to enforce maritime restrictions. And in direct retaliation, Iran deployed maritime mines into those same critical waters. Looked at strictly as cause and effect, these overlapping military maneuvers have effectively choked off one of the absolute most vital shipping arteries on the planet, creating immediate, severe gridlock in the movement of global energy.
So, what happens when military brinkmanship slams the door shut on a primary artery of global trade? Really, what is the actual tangible price of a global choke point? Well, the numbers are absolutely staggering, especially for nations in the global south like India, which has to import over 85% of its crude oil. $15 to $20 billion. Let's just pause on that for a second. That is the exact amount added to India's annual import bill for every single $10 spike in the price of a barrel of crude oil. When prices suddenly surge from $80 to $110 a barrel during a conflict like this, we are looking at an additional $50 billion slapped right onto the national trade deficit. This is exactly where abstract, high-level geopolitics hits the real-world national treasury. And that leads right into Section 3, the global grocery emergency.
Because the pain doesn't just stop at the national treasury. That ripple effect flows instantly and aggressively right down to the consumer. This brings us to what international aid organizations are literally calling the global grocery emergency. When fuel prices surge, it's not just your gas tank taking the hit. It's the diesel powering the massive freight trucks delivering food to your local store. It's the petroleum-based fertilizers used to even grow that food in the first place. When 80% of the caloric intake for the Gulf states relies on transit through the Strait of Hormuz, a blockade means basic food staples skyrocket by anywhere from 40 to 120%. Aid groups are raising the alarm that 45 million more people globally could be pushed to the brink of hunger just from these soaring transport costs. Back in India, everyday citizens are already facing widespread LPG shortages. This conflict premium is quite literally inflating the baseline cost of human survival.
And all that relentless economic pressure, it completely cooks the currency. In late April 2026, the Indian rupee tanked to a record low of 94.85 to the dollar. Now, I know currency markets are incredibly complex, but the reality on the street is painfully simple. The Indian diaspora is facing a massive squeeze on their ability to send money back home. The transport sectors are getting crushed by surging diesel margins, and a massive fertilizer subsidy crisis is just looming on the horizon.
Moving to Section 4, India's Maritime Rescue Mission. So how does a country actually survive when its main economic lifeline is abruptly cut? Well, Indian policymakers had to initiate a massive rescue mission, and they did it in 3 immediate steps. First, they literally sent the Navy. Operation Urja Suraksha deployed 5 warships to actively escort vulnerable cargo vessels straight out of the hot zone, stepping up big time as a net security provider. Second, they smartly utilized bypass infrastructure, pulling oil through the UAE's ADCOP pipeline over to Fujairah and utilizing Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline to dodge the strait altogether. And third, they rapidly accelerated supplier diversification over to the Atlantic Basin, pulling crude from Brazil, Guyana, and Canada as a hard hedge against these Middle East choke points.
And this brilliantly illustrates how fast a massive strategic pivot happens in real time. Just look at Oman, an absolutely mind-blowing 461% increase in crude imports. Why? Simple geography. Oman's coastline falls safely outside the Strait of Hormuz. Oman basically became the quiet, undisputed winner of this crisis, offering the most geographically secure supply in the whole region. Meanwhile, imports coming via the UAE spiked by 43%, which effectively offset the massive losses from other nations that were trapped entirely behind the blockade.
But, a crisis like this also exposes your hidden flaws. India's Phase 1 strategic petroleum reserves were caught heavily exposed, sitting only 64% filled. That 36% of empty space, that is a terrifying strategic gap. As of March 2026, those reserves provided only about 9.5 days of direct crude cover. Even when you factor in all commercial stocks, they still fall dangerously short of the International Energy Agency's 90-day benchmark. That total lack of a buffer is exactly why a localized shock over in the Gulf was felt so intensely and so incredibly fast halfway across the world.
Which brings us to Section 5, Rebuilding the Energy Order.
Because surviving a single month of chaos is one thing, but making sure you are never held hostage by it again, that requires permanent, deep-rooted reform. This single month of gridlock has acted as a phenomenal catalyst for structural change. The Indian state is pivoting harder and faster than ever before. They're fast-tracking domestic gas pipelines to finally build a gas-based economy that just isn't as sensitive to oil shocks. Remember that empty reserve space we just talked about? They're fixing it by adopting a sharp commercial model, leasing out that SPR space to foreign national companies like the UAE's ADNOC, just to ensure that physical crude is always sitting right there on Indian soil. And on top of all that, the private sector is stepping up with a massive $100 billion push into renewable energy to build true, impenetrable, long-term resilience.
And hey, there is actually a pretty massive silver lining on the horizon here. For decades, Gulf producers essentially forced an Asian premium, meaning Asian buyers were historically charged more for the exact same oil than Western buyers were. But now, as the UAE officially breaks from the Saudi-led cartel, that 60-year era of cozy, cartel-managed stability is dead. In its place, a totally fragmented, highly competitive, market-driven system is roaring to life. For heavy importers, this newfound independence among suppliers could finally mean the total elimination of that Asian premium once and for all.
Leading us to our final part, Section 6, the New World Paradox.
The global petroleum order has permanently fractured, guys. The rules of the game have changed literally overnight, which brings us face to face with the defining question for the global south moving forward. If the world's single most important shipping lane is suddenly an active war zone, how on earth do you keep 1 billion people from running out of fuel? The answers we've explored today, naval escorts, geographic bypasses, and aggressive rapid supply diversification, these aren't just neat policy options anymore. They are absolutely mandatory for national survival.
So, the crucial point here is summed up perfectly by what experts are calling the Hormuz paradox. This immediate, terrifying crisis violently proved that geographic proximity and traditional brotherly diplomatic ties are basically useless as guarantees of security. The extreme vulnerability of relying on one single geographic choke point can only be offset by the strategic depth of a massive, multipolar, highly diversified supply network. So, as the UAE strikes out completely on its own, and the rest of the world scrambles to adapt to this messy, post-cartel reality, we are left with one really profound final thought. In a heavily fragmented world where basic geography no longer guarantees your security, what is the true price of national sovereignty? Does it lie in raw military strength, in deep domestic reserves, or simply in having the agility to constantly navigate a shifting web of global alliances? Thank you so much for diving into this incredibly complex, absolutely fascinating explainer with me today. Stay curious and keep questioning the systems that power our world.